Dark Souls. Probably my favorite game trilogy ever, even surpassing my boundless love for the original Stalker trilogy. Hi, by the way. My introduction to From Software's games actually started with the third game, which I still adore deeply. After that, I ventured into another masterpieces by Miyazaki, such as Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Demon Souls. It was only after experiencing all these newer games from the Japanese genius that I finally dove into the original Dark Souls, and naturally fell in love with it just as much as the others. But as I have mentioned in my previous videos, there is one game I have put off playing for far too long, and by now I am sure everyone has already guessed that I'm talking about Dark Souls 2. And oh boy, where to even begin? I have never understood why, despite having some of the highest ratings in the series, Dark Souls 2 is considered the ugly duckling of the Souls family among fans. Personally, given my long tenure in the Souls-like community, there is not a single day that goes by without stumbling upon yet another incredibly funny meme claiming that Dark Souls 2 is fucking garbage. Much less frequently, though not once in a blue moon, I came across articles and videos filled with fury from players defending the game from widespread hatred, but sometimes they were overly emotional and subjective. I have never come across a truly neutral opinion on this game, so it feels like Dark Souls 2 is something you either passionately love or vehemently hate. And I will try to approach this review from the perspective of someone who has played literally every From Software game that we call Souls-like before diving into Dark Souls 2. And right away, I would like to address both groups of people, those who hate Dark Souls 2 with all their heart, and those who adore it and consider it From Software's best game. In this video, I will criticize the game for its obvious flaws, as well as praise it where it deserves. Perhaps this isn't the wisest choice on my part, because that way both fans and haters will shove a whole bucket full of dicks down my throat, but hey, what can you do? Though, spoiler alert, I will be praising the game a whole lot more. I hope I will manage to say something smart that most viewers will agree with, and if I do, please let me know in the comments. I read them all, by the way. And a quick note that I will be playing the Scholar of the First edition of the game, since it's the only one I have in my Steam library. I know that many folks told me to play the original version specifically, but I still decided to tackle this one. And on that note, I wish bon appetit to everyone who decided to have the lunch while watching this video, and sweet dreams to anyone who decided to take a nap to it. So, December 7th, 2012. It's been just a few months since the release of the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, which wrapped up the first Dark Souls. And suddenly, out of nowhere, during Spike Video Games Award ceremony, the world saw a trailer for a game that would later become known to everyone as Dark Souls 2. This announcement immediately splits the audience into two camps. Some are hyped to get a new Souls games, while others are wary, feeling it's announced way too soon and accompanied by a weird trailer lacking the vibe of the original game. Fueling the flames even further is the news that, instead of Miyazaki, development will be handled by two other guys, Tomohiro Shibuya and Yui Tanimura. And Shibuya's very first statement right after the game announcement becomes legendary. The game will be more straightforward and more understandable. Obviously, a statement like that hit the community like a goddamn bombshell. Shibuya later clarified he meant a smoother entry into the game, not dumping it down for casual sales. But the very fact that he was appointed to a role he had zero experience in only heightened fan anxiety. Did this bite Dark Souls 2 in the ass later? Of course it did. Slightly jumping ahead here, the story of this game's creation is a tangled mess. An unofficial mid-project reboot, an absolutely massive marketing campaign comparable even to Elden Ring's, and players' overinflated expectations. Some time passed after the announcement of the sequel, and initial negativity somewhat died down. Numerous interviews helped clear up fans' initial concerns, as did Miyazaki's presence. Though he wasn't directly involved in the game's creation, he took on a supervisory role. They hadn't initially involved him for several reasons, primarily because at the time he was already fully committed to another studio project, namely Bloodborne. Secondly, there weren't supposed to be any sequels to the original Dark Souls at all, because Dark Souls is Miyazaki's baby, and he's repeatedly stated in the past that he isn't fond of sequels. Tomohiro Shibuya, an industry veteran, was originally appointed as the lead director for Dark Souls 2. Under his supervision, the game apparently looked a lot more like Elden Ring, At least that's what is suggested by the huge scale of unused assets discovered later in the game files. However, a few years into development, things went sideways. Around 30 months before the game's release, Tomohiro Shibuya was suddenly no longer mentioned as a director. The role passed entirely to Yui Tanimura, a familiar name in the industry, though he had never held the position of lead director before. Moreover, he had to juggle that new role along with being a producer. On top of the monumental task of directing Dark Souls 2, Tanimura also actively participated in promoting the game, appearing in countless marketing materials. As a result, instead of getting a cohesive, unified product shaped by collective team effort, we got a goddamn patchwork quilt of different ideas awkwardly stitched together. If you really want to see what the true Dark Souls 2 might have been, the game as envisioned by Yui Tanimura, you should definitely check out the DLCs. Those were developed under less crunch, clearly reflecting Tanimura's personal style, carried over from his earlier From Software projects. Smaller, yet incredibly complex and thoughtfully crafted areas, entire sections built around specific threats like poison, slowdowns or deadly traps. Later, following the same principles, Tanimura would oversee development of the DLCs for Dark Souls 3. But before we completely dive into the world of Dark Souls 2, let me just take a quick moment. And don't worry, it's not an ad break. I simply wanted to thank you for all the tremendous support you showed on my previous video about the original Dark Souls. I truly enjoyed reading every single comment about your unique experience with Dark Souls, as well as your requests for a similar video about its sequel. Initially, I had asked for 200 likes on that video, but you guys absolutely smashed it with way more. Just know that every single view, like, comment, or even better, a subscription to my channel is a huge boost to my motivation to keep making videos, and literally my only chance to get noticed by more people. Thanks again from the bottom of my heart. And with all that said, let's set out on a journey into the kingdom of Drangleic and immerse ourselves in the fascinating world of Dark Souls 2. Unlike other Dark Souls games, our character here actually has some sort of backstory and a defined reason for going through all this mess. We are a nameless wanderer who, unfortunately, caught the undead curse that started spreading again since the events of the first game. Each time we die, we lose bits of our memory and humanity. Apparently, we even had a wife and child, but because of our repeated death, their memory literally starts to fade. Like they're melting away, along with everything connected to them, as we slowly forget. An old granny tells us we should journey to the kingdom of Drangleic, because apparently there is a king there who supposedly found a way to rid himself of this curse. We need to find him, learn his secret, and stop turning hollow after every death. On the way there, we meet the old ladies, 3 sisters who used to be firekeepers, and there was supposedly a 4th sister among them. According to the game's wiki, the first granny who spoke to us might actually be that 4th sister, but honestly, I wouldn't stake my life on that. After leaving them, we arrive at Majula, the local hub with merchants, a blacksmith, a bonfire, and a local firekeeper, the Emerald Herald. She tells us that we must reach Vendrick, the king of these lands, who has grasped the true nature of souls. And that's basically all the exposition we get at the start of the game. Now, here is where I have some mixed feelings. You see, in other Souls games, namely in the first and the third entries, the intro cutscene provided crucial information upfront. Like, hey, you see these guys in the intro? You are gonna have to kick their asses later. And the whole game slowly built us up to those encounters. I mean, sure, Dark Souls 2 gives the main character a bit of backstory, but then what exactly are we supposed to be doing? Find the local king. Okay, got it. But why do we have to wander the entire world first, encountering random freaks and beating their asses before we even get to see him? This might sound nitpicky, and to be fair, it totally is. After all, even Bloodborne didn't give us a crystal clear goal from the start, just a vague objective to escape the Yharnam. Just to clarify, this is a minor gripe of mine and barely affects my overall impression of the game. I just happen to prefer how the other games in the series handle their openings, and that's all. But let's get back to Majula. At this point, 2 paths are open to us. We can head to the Forest of Fallen Giants, or Hade's Tower of Flame. For me, the first proper location became the Forest of Fallen Giants. Briefly about it, excellent location. Beautiful, thoughtful, expansive, and varied. We'll explore forests, fortresses, castle walls, giant battlefields, and other smaller areas. It's complex, appropriately challenging, and genuinely interesting to explore. And as for the shortcut through the wall from the second bonfire, I just wanna stand up and applaud the developers for that one. According to the lore, giants once attacked this fortress and died here in industrial quantities, and why the giants attacked it in the first place, I will also tell you later. At the end of this location, the first real boss awaits us, the last giant. Honestly, he is barely worth mentioning, an extremely easy, forgettable boss you would actually have to try really hard to die to. And by the way, I managed exactly that. After defeating him, a path opens leading upwards, where a far more serious opponent awaits us, the Pursuer. Now, this dude forced me to spend quite a bit of time trying to beat him. He actually has a pretty cool mechanic on his arena, the ability to shoot him with ballistas, but successfully pulling it off is ridiculously rare. Overall, he is a pretty challenging boss early in the game, who will keep popping up several times during our playthrough. Eventually though, I found a winning tactic. Just keep rolling to the right of his attacks, and suddenly he is not that scary anymore. The next location I tackled was the Lost Bastille, but after running around for a bit and getting my ass handed to me by crowds of soldiers, I decided to return there later, instead checking out other available area first, Hade's Tower of Flame. Visually stunning location, just a shame it's so damn short. I had heard plenty about this place long before I decided to try the game myself. Everyone out there has criticized From Software for packing so many strong enemies into one tiny area, and as if that wasn't enough, there is a wyvern chilling at the end, ready to fry your ass. And it would have been fine if you could just sprint through, pull a lever and quickly open the path to the boss, but nope. The breach lowers painfully slow, and pulling the lever doesn't grant you invisibility frames, so your only option is to painstakingly clear out the entire location over and over again, desperately trying to reach out that damn lever. And you know what? That's exactly what I did. And I suppose this is the perfect time to address one of Dark Souls' 2 unique features, the enemy respawn mechanic. You see, the sequel's developers came up with an unprecedented innovation, introducing a limit to how many times enemies respawn in a location, and I'm pretty sure this was influenced by Shibuya's infamous words about making the game more accessible. If I'm not mistaken, the respawn limit is 12, so after you kill the same enemy a dozen times, it stops coming back. And guess what I did? Exactly, I cleared up my path to the wyvern by murdering every single enemy 12 times. But here is the craziest part. I honestly didn't mind it at all. It didn't even slightly piss me off, even though I usually despise repetitive tasks. The reason is simple. These enemies drop a ton of souls, and while repeatedly killing them, I was basically just leveling myself up. Now, at this very moment, someone probably furiously typing an angry comment about how I'm such a bastard for overleveling, and not just idiotically running straight through the enemies, and then whining later about how unfairly hard it is to find them all at once, and blah blah blah. And you know what? I honestly don't give a shit. I decided to make my life easier, and I don't regret it one bit. The bosses of this location are two pretty intriguing characters, each interesting in their own way. First up for me was the Dragon Rider, and here there are some cool nuances worth mentioning. Throughout this area, we have the option to activate special levers that expand the boss arena. Of course, you can also skip doing that entirely, and instead use probably the most infamous cheese tactic in all of Dark Souls 2. But I genuinely don't get why people even use this cheese. Dragon Rider is one of the easiest bosses in the entire game, and beating him without taking a single hit is totally doable. This was actually the first time I tried summoning a phantom to help in a fight, but in my defense, let me just say that this first and last attempt ended roughly like this. The second boss of the area was our good old buddy, Old Dragon Slayer Ornstein, who also didn't really give me any trouble, and turned out to be just a pale shadow of his legendary self from the original Dark Souls. The only question that I had in mind after fighting him is, what the hell was he even doing there? Next up, we enter another incredibly interesting area, No Man's Wharf. And this might sound stupid as hell, but this is genuinely one of my favorite locations in the game, and I will give you a couple of reasons why. Firstly, it gently nudges you to use a torch, introducing the torch lighting mechanic to illuminate the surroundings. And then, I like this mechanic so damn much that I really wish they would put it into every future From Software game. If I'm not mistaken, they actually did something similar in Elden Ring, and not just the torch, but we'll get to that later. Going back to the torches, this area even has enemies who freak out when they see you holding one, panicking and pressing themselves up against the walls, further enhancing the immersion and thoughtfulness of the environment. And the second reason I love this location is, well, just look at this huge ass ship. Who the hell doesn't love giant ships? Inside this ship, by the way, is a pretty cool boss fight. The boss itself is pretty forgettable, but the arena gradually floods with water during the battle, making it progressively harder and more intense. Ultimately, both of these paths will lead us to the Lost Bastille, a local prison. So basically we have two possible roads to get there, or you could just clear out both roads, like I did, giving myself a pretty nice power up at the start of the game. But you might now have a pretty reasonable question. What are these locations anyway, and what the hell is going on there? I specifically decided to save this juicy part for last today, since, in my opinion, storytelling is one of Dark Souls' two greatest strengths. Sure, the first and third Dark Souls games introduced their worlds more clearly by giving us a straightforward objective at the start, but by the middle everything becomes a bit confusing. Dark Souls 2, however, hits us the story little by little, spoonful by spoonful. Coming back to Lost Bastille, this location serves as the kingdom's prison. When the undead curse started spreading again, the local king, Vendrick, decided to solve this problem with brutal force, hunting down the rising undead through all his lands. Eventually, they literally ran out of burial space, and began shipping those poor bastards to the Lost Bastille by boat. We came here for a specific purpose, though when you're actually playing, you have absolutely no clue what that purpose is. At this point, the situation is this. Scattered throughout the world are 4 great souls, the remnants of the original Souls Queen and his bros possessed way back then. Long ago, Vendrick defeated the bearers of these great souls, and used their power to build his great kingdom. Now, to prove ourselves as worthy warriors, we must defeat these very same great souls once again. But this raises an obvious question. If Vendrick defeated these souls, presumably taking them for himself, then why are their bearers still alive, still carrying these souls around? That question remains open. One popular fan theory suggests that Vendrick was actually the protagonist of the original Dark Souls, who took these great souls, linked the fire, and went off to establish his kingdom. Personally, I'm not fully convinced by this theory, because when linking the fire in the original Dark Souls, you seem to sacrifice yourself entirely. But hell, who really knows? And the first great soul on our path is the Lost Sinner, who holds the remnants of the Witch of Idolit's soul. Their stories are pretty damn similar actually. The Witch of Idolit once tried to artificially recreate the first flame, eventually paying dearly for her hubris by creating the Chaos Flame instead. Similarly, the Lost Sinner secretly attempted to ignite the first flame on her own, committing a grave sin and getting herself locked up for it. The boss herself turned out pretty interesting, appropriately challenging with her own unique twists. If you just walk right into her arena, you will have to fight her in almost total darkness, making it kinda hard to clearly see and react to her attacks. But if you're clever enough to light the oil reserves on the both sides of the entrance beforehand, the arena becomes illuminated and you will breeze through the fight without much trouble. On our way to her, we will also run into an intermediate boss, the Ruined Sentinels. Honestly, these guys are complete pushovers, with the only complication being that you have to fight 3 opponents at once. Later in the game, these bastards become regular mobs, so I won't dwell on them too much here either. Next up, I set up my sights on the Old King's Soul, and my journey began at Huntman's Copse. This was a separate zone where Vendrick personally led a ruthless hunt against the hollowed undead, dumping them in a pit or locking them up in prison afterward. It's a pretty interesting location, but goddamn, I never want to go back there again. Besides the annoying as hell enemies, perfectly capable of kicking your ass, we also have 2 boss fights here, and honestly both of them are utter garbage. The first one I faced was the Executioner's Chariot, if you can even call that a fight. You literally just dodge a chariot endlessly riding in circles, then shut the gate, cause a traffic accident, and mercilessly finish off the poor horses. After this, we face the mandatory boss, the Skeleton Lords. These skeleton dudes originally served the old Iron King, and we'll get to him later. and were dispatched here to hunt and capture every undead they encountered. However, these sick bastards decided they would have some fun instead, tormenting their undead captives like sadistic assholes. They even built the entire arena where we fought the executioner's chariot, treating it like some gladiatorial spectacle to endlessly crush and torture the unlucky undead who fell into their hands. After defeating the skeleton lords, we land in one of the most wonderful areas in the whole game. Remember my list of locations from my Dark Souls video, affectionately labeled as shithole? Well folks, we've got another one joining the ranks. I hope I don't have to explain why this location earned this esteemed title. The boss here is the covetous demon, who deeply loved the local queen. Sadly, this love was entirely unrequited, and in despair, he literally ate his feelings away his entire life, ultimately turning into this blob of misery. As for the queen herself, Mitha, the baneful queen, we'll meet her a little further ahead. Turns out she also suffered from unrequited love for another local pretty boy we'll discuss later. By the way, this queen was in cahoots with skeleton lords, from whom she received slaves. These slaves were forced to dig into the soil of Harvest Valley, extracting poisonous substances that Mitha consumed, hoping they would enhance her beauty. Obviously, you don't need to be a genius to realize that those substances turned her into the hideous monster we see today. As bosses, both are pretty damn mediocre. Mitha can be a bit of trouble if you don't realize there is a way to drain the poison from her arena floor before the fight. I didn't figure it out myself, so had to resort to reading guides. I will admit, guilty as charged. But once the poison's gone, she's a breeze on the first try. And honestly, I don't even want to talk about the covetous demon. From what I gathered, the entire Souls community already considers him the weakest and most pathetic boss in the entire series, who literally can't do shit to you. And all those intermediate lands and bosses, they were just a warm-up leading us to the Iron Key, the domain of the old King Soul. And yes, this soul once belonged to none other than Gwyn himself, but we'll get to that in a bit. Now, we're getting to the good stuff. Oh man, how many takes I've heard about Iron Keep. Those narrow catwalks, the endless hordes of enemies, the goddamn archers, and that cursed lava pit below. And here, I can't help but agree. Just like with Hyde's Tower of Flame, this place is packed with enemies, and none of them are pushovers. But again, they only become a problem if you go full damn bass mode and sprint through the place like a lunatic, aggroing every knight inside and inevitably getting your ass beat. If you play smart, pick them off one by one, keep your distance, and use all the tricks the devs left lying around. Then honestly, the area is not that bad. I don't know, let me know what you think in the comments, but personally my ass remained unburned here. And I think I ever heard that you can somehow drain the lava, but I wouldn't swear by it. I never managed to do it myself. Now, this location also features one of the toughest bosses in the base game, at least in my opinion, Smelter Demon. The devs clearly decided to make him a pain in the ass, giving him monstrous damage, solid defense, and just to spice things up, a mid-fight phase where he sets himself on fire, meaning you will take constant burn damage just from standing near the guy. But again, while he's a real challenge, he's nowhere near the nightmare level of something like the top tier bosses in Dark Souls 3. Looking at you, Dancer of the Boreal Valley. Finally, we come face to face with the old Iron King, wielder of Gwyn's soul. Once upon a time, this king was just a regular lord who craved fame and power. Eventually, he married Mitha, the baneful queen, but our boy couldn't keep it in his pants and started a fling with the Princess of Ven, apparently a royal from neighboring kingdom. In his quest for power, the old king received some major help from a wandering warrior, Sir Alone. They became bros, and Alone trained the king's army in his martial arts. In honor of this, the king named his troops the Alone Knights. And so the king lived large, forging his elite army, building the monstrous construct we now know as the Smelter Demon, and erected a massive citadel made entirely of iron, all while continuing to mine for precious metals. But there was a little problem. The citadel was built directly above a sea of molten lava, and eventually, under its own weight, began sinking. The Smelter Demon also went apeshit and chucked the king straight into the lava, where something ancient and evil was waiting. That ancient evil consumed the old Iron King, and from what I understand, that evil was Gwyn's soul. It fused with him and transformed him into the enormous demon we end up slaying. Later, in the DLCs, we'll visit his industrial wastelands, but more on that soon. Alright, today's main course is a full arc of locations that comfortably falls into the shithole category. First up, we've got Grave of Saints, accessible through the well in Majula. You either make a desperate series of leaps across the beams, praying this time you don't splatter at the bottom, or like a wealthy gentleman, you cut up some souls to buy a proper ladder from the shady dude you might have already bumped into earlier. It's an extremely short location that once served as a resting place for the Drangleic's holy men, but has since been completely overrun by rats. The boss here is the Royal Rat Vanguard, and honestly, what's even the point in commenting? It's literally just a swarm of rats and one special rat leading them. Moving forward, we arrive at the Gutter, a location that heavily channels the legendary awfulness of Blighttown from the first game. It's a pitch-dark hellhole filled with confusing pathways and enemies who love stocking poison on you. Once again, torches are your best friends here, and this one goes straight into the shithole collection, no debate. And when you finally get through that mess, you reach the Black Gulch, which has a little surprise in store. Remember the boss called the Last Giant? Yeah, that was bullshit. Down there you'll find a couple more giants still alive, who actually fit the title The Last Giants, if you catch my drift. This zone, and the one before it, basically serves as a giant dump where undead corpses were thrown in bulk before they start being shipped off to the last Bastille. And in this very cesspool, an enormous amount of corpses fused into one grotesque abomination known as the Rotten, another bearer of Great Soul, specifically the soul of a great Lord Nito. And yeah, I think the visual parallel is pretty clear here. Both Nito and the Rotten are just massive flesh piles made up of the very creatures they rule over. The fight itself is incredibly easy and won't cause you much trouble. But getting to that boss, that, my friends, is some next level bullshit. A dumb, tedious, aggravating run from the bonfire to the boss room with nothing redeeming about it. And I won't even try to defend that design. Absolute garbage. All that's left now is to obtain the final Great Soul, the soul of Thies, the Scaleless. And on the way to that soul, we'll get to meet some of Thies' personal experiments. And I'm not even joking, we're talking about half-human, half-scorpion hybrids. One example is Naika and Tark. These two were once a peaceful couple living quiet lives in the shaded ruins, but over time, Naika started to lose her mind, becoming increasingly violent and aggressive. Eventually, a war broke out between them, and it's been raging for years by the time we arrive. Further along, we enter a rather interesting area, the Doors of Pharos. It's named after a ridiculous number of Pharos lockstone mechanisms scattered around. The place was originally home to the Grim race, but later also became infested by rats from the Rat King Covenant, led by a fat-ass rat that we can defeat along the way. But our main goal is Brightstone Cove Tseldora, which was once a mining settlement of Drangleic. The town was founded by Duke Tseldora, a man obsessed with spiders. In this settlement, they mined a rare mineral called Brightstone. At first, everything seemed fine, but as the town grew prosperous, its people became captivated by the Brightstone's strange, enchanting properties. They were consumed by greed and became obsessively chasing that which they lacked, eventually dooming the entire town to collapse. At some point, the Duke's pet, Freya, became the host of a great soul, the soul of Thies, the Scaleless. That's most likely what led to her grotesque transformation into a giant spider, although this detail is a bit debatable, and I will explain why shortly. Freya is another boss in the game, and her difficulty solely comes from the swarm of minions crawling all around her. She went down on my first try, and I'm damn thankful for that, because the path to her arena includes that infamous corridor. Oh god, I've heard so many horror stories about that corridor, and I count myself lucky I had to go through it just once. I will admit, even with all my love for Dark Souls 2, there are just some moments in this game I simply cannot defend, and this corridor is absolutely one of them. It's a straight up run to the boss room, and you will have to do it every single time you die to her. No shortcuts, no bonfire near the fog gates, just pure pain. As for the boss herself, Freya is more of a filler fight. Now, earlier I said that her possession of a great soul is a bit of a questionable topic, and here is why. After killing Freya, we only get her soul. The great soul itself is just lying nearby on the ground. In all other cases, we received the great soul after killing the boss who held it. So what are they trying to suggest here? That the Duke was the actual soul bearer, not Freya? And maybe Freya just stumbled upon his soul and chose to guard it rather than claim it for herself. I honestly have no clue. After obtaining the final Great Soul, we're paid a visit by Aldia, and oh boy, I've got a lot to say about this guy. But I will save that for a little later. For now, I'll just say this: he's the brother of Vendrick. Where Vendrick was a strong and brave warrior who built his own kingdom through might and leadership, Aldia was a mysterious researcher who conducted horrific experiments in his secluded mansion. From what I understand, those very experiments are what led to his current grotesque, inhuman appearance. He tells us that, at this point, we essentially have two paths: either follow the rules of this world, or tear them to pieces. He also advises us to seek out Vendrick as soon as possible, since he's the only one who might still hold the answers we need. And from that moment, the way opens to Drangleic castle, where Vendrick is supposedly located. Upon arriving, however, we find out Vendrick isn't even there. Instead, we're greeted by his queen, Nashandra. She sings Vendrick's praises, talking about how, when even undead curse descended upon the land, he found a way to resist it, but tragically, he was never able to claim the true throne. After this chat, we are advised to go find him. Turns out, for mysterious reasons, Vendrick isn't in the castle proper, but buried deep beneath it, sealed away behind layers of stone and time. As we push forward, we start encountering Vendrick's elite knights, loyal to their king, even in his absence. Our path takes us first through the lower levels of the castle, where we face the Looking Glass Knight, a reasonably interesting boss with a cool mechanic, summoning a phantom to help him. From what I heard, he used to be able to summon actual players into your boss fight. For me though, he didn't pose any problems at all. I never even saw the summoning mechanic happen during my fight. Lore-wise, this knight served as a Vendrick foreboding lieutenant, wielding a mirror-like shield with the power to pierce into other worlds. Back before the kingdom fell to shit, he acted as a trial, testing warriors who wanted to serve under the king. Now he stands at the first line of defense on the road to Vendrick himself. Right after that, we arrive at the Shrine of Amana, an ancient, half-submerged temple built for one sole purpose: to contain the Demon of Song. And no joke, that's literally all the lore I could find on this location. As for the Demon of Song itself, the boss is kinda whatever, just swings its stubby limbs around for ages, and in between those sluggish moves you can easily smash its face in. But the location itself, crafted in the finest traditions of Dark Souls pain. That moment with mages standing waist deep in water, all while a phantom invader decided to join the fun, that was enough for me to summon a friendly phantom. Together, we sprinted through the hellhole and just so happened to stumble into the boss fog. After that, we moved into the Undead Crypt, where we once again run into Aldia, who, as always, spouts deeply philosophical lore monologue that I totally didn't skip, not even once. The crypt itself is pure madness. One of the main gimmicks throughout the area is a bell-based alert system. If you make too much noise, and trust me you will, some enemy will ring a bell, and that bell call brings a horde of undead enemies charging right at you. Now here is the best part. The corridor leading to one of the hardest bosses in the base game is exactly the place where this damn bell rings. And believe me, the number of enemies packed into that corridor is more than enough to give you an unforgettable night of pain, death, and controller snap and rage. Once you make it through that death trap, you'll face Velstad, Vendrick's right-hand man, commander of the Royal Knights, and one of his most loyal servants. Even now, hollowed and tainted by the abyss, he still stands firm, guarding his fallen king to the very end. And I will talk about the abyss a bit later. As a boss, Velstad is solid. Not gonna lie, he's not super difficult by himself. The real challenge is the absolute bullshit path leading up to him. But once you're in the arena, it's a proper, worthy duel. After defeating Velstad, we finally come face to face with Vendrick, a shriveled undead husk, completely devoid of thoughts or reason. He aimlessly wanders his prison, ignoring our presence entirely. From his discarded armor, we pick up the King's Ring, the symbol of the king. And with that ring, we can now push forward to the east. That's exactly where we're headed next, into Aldia's domain. And it's here we begin to understand that Aldia serves as this world's version of Seas the Scaleless, conducting experiments to create monstrous abominations. But the real intrigue lies further ahead. At the end of Aldia's lands, we encounter a full-fledged dragon locked in a massive cage. Technically, the game calls it a guardian dragon, but for some reason, according to the wikis, it's classified as a wyvern. This dragon guards an elevator that takes us to the Dragon Shrine, Aldia's hidden laboratory. He meets us there one final time, continuing his philosophical mind games, urging us to break the cycle of flame. And within the Dragon Shrine lies Aldia's crowning achievement, a fully sentient, speaking ancient dragon. Somehow Aldia managed to create it. This creature not only talks but seems to be fully aware of what's happening in the kingdom and why we are here. This dragon gives us the Ashen Mist Heart, a key item that allows us to peer into the memories of things long deceased. Also, fun fact, we can kill a dragon and obtain giant soul from it, strongly hinting that the creature isn't truly ancient, but rather an artificial construct made using the soul of a giant and the remains of a long-dead dragon. And with that, we now have almost everything we need for the final stretch. Using the King's Ring, we can now unlock the path to the memory of a dead giant, where we fight the Giant Lord, and obtain the Giant's Kinship, a key item required to reach the endgame. But before we do that, we can also visit the remaining memories of fallen giants, each one rewarding us with a giant soul. And that, my friends, is the detail you will want to remember, because it will come into play very soon. But before we charge into the finale, let's take a step back and actually try to figure out what the hell is going on here. Let's start from the very beginning. There was Vendrick, a strong and fearless king, and his clever brother Aldia. Vendrick, having conquered all threats, built the glorious kingdom of Drangleic. Meanwhile, his brother Aldia was off in the shadows, conducting his experiments, and not just for funsies. Both brothers understood that their happiness wouldn't last. They were aware of the age of fire, of the first flame, and the fact that it was inevitably fading. So they started looking for a way out, an escape from this cursed cycle. At some point, into the kingdom of Drangleic came Nashandra, literally appearing out of nowhere. She instantly wowed everyone with her dark beauty. Then she quickly wrapped Vendrick around her finger and filled his head with lies, telling him that the giants were envious of his riches and would soon try to steal them for themselves. So Vendrick did what any war-hungry king would do. He raised an army and invaded the land of the giants, stealing a powerful treasure from them. As it would later turn out, this treasure was none other than the throne of the giants, or more accurately, something that functioned like a portable first flame kiln. How the hell it became portable after the first game, and how the giants ended up with it in the first place, well, I have no clue. After that, the flames started to fade, and then that curse began to spread. Vendrick desperately tried to fight it, organizing mass undead hunts and dumping their bodies into pits and off to the Lost Bastille, but even that didn't stop the rot. The giants, understandably pissed, launched a full-scale invasion of Drangleic, and a massive war broke out. Countless giants were slaughtered, and from the fallen corpses grew the forest of the fallen giants. From what I've gathered, Vendrick might have actually lost the war, yet somehow the King of Giants was still ultimately defeated. And here, we get a true Dark Souls 1 moment. Our character gets pulled into the past, where they wreak absolute havoc, only for all those heroic feats to be erased from the history and credited to someone else. And yeah, it turns out we were the ones who actually defeated the Giant Lord, who is the King of Giants, during that ancient battle. But as if all this kingdom collapse chaos wasn't enough, the Abyss decided to make a comeback too. Turns out, Manus wasn't fully defeated in the first game. His soul shattered into 4 fragments, each representing one of his darkest traits. And every one of those fragments manifested as a woman. Nashandra, as it turns out, is the embodiment of Manus' greed, his hunger for power and domination, and we'll meet the other 3 fragments in the DLCs. Vendrick and Aldia realized shit was going south real fast, so Aldia did the unthinkable. He recreated an ancient dragon, hoping to ask it what they were supposed to do. We don't know exactly what the dragon told them, but it clearly shook both brothers to their core, because from that point on, they stopped trying to rekindle the flame, and instead focused on breaking the cycle. And so, they were left with one last option: wait for the chosen undead, someone who would come and make the right decision. Vendrick knew he couldn't take on Nashandra himself. At first, he pinned his hopes on Aldia, but his brother eventually disappeared without a trace. In the end, Vendrick sealed the kiln, locking it behind layer after layer of protection. He appointed his 2 most trusted knights to guard it. Then he ripped out his own soul and crown hiding them deep within the shrine of Amana behind a door that only humans could open, meaning Nashandra would never be able to reach it. Afterwards, he sealed himself inside the crypt, placing Velstadt at the gate. Judging by Velstadt's corrupting soul, it seems Nashandra may have even tried to reach him, but he stood his ground to the bitter end, protecting his king. And then we appeared, the chosen undead, ready to walk into the final chapter. But not just yet, because our preparations aren't complete. We still got 3 DLCs waiting for us. And quick message from me while I'm editing this video. Unfortunately, due to my own stupidity, I lost some of the footage from the DLC boss fights and the game's ending. And honestly, I'm not going to replay the whole game just to record those moments again, since this video has been delayed enough as it is. Apologies in advance, and I hope you will understand. I'll try to be a lot more careful next time when deleting unnecessary footage. Yeah, my bad. Luckily, I only lost the fights recordings. Everything that happened before and after the battles is still intact, so I'll still be using those clips in the final edit. And alright, enough of that. Let's finally dive into the DLCs. At first, we can enter Vendrick's memories by touching his armor, and there we finally hear from the man himself what our true task is. To become the true king, we must acquire 4 crowns, one of them being Vendrick's own, and the other 3 hidden in the DLCs. Once we gather them all, we can bring them to him. And so, off we go into the DLCs, each one centering around a fallen king, and trust me, each has its own wild story. First up on my list is the DLC about the Sunken King, ruler of Shulva. This king built his kingdom deep underground, centering around Thin, the slumbering dragon. Thin was a long dormant dragon, discovered and worshipped by the people of Shulva. The Sunken King even created the Dragon's Sanctum, a holy place built specifically to protect the dragon from the intruders. However, at some point, the kingdom was invaded by the Drangleic cult, a group obsessed with dragons who believed that by killing one and stealing its fresh blood, they could achieve a true understanding of life. So they slaughtered the people of Shulva and tried to kill Thin as well, but the dragon wasn't having any of it. Thin, filled with poison accumulated over centuries of sleep, unleashed his fury, wiping out the invaders and blanketing the city in toxic rot. Also, worth noting, there is a weird area in Shulva where mutated creatures roam, seemingly unfinished dragons or twisted abominations. At first, it's natural to assume Aldia had a hand in this. Creating freakish life forms was totally his thing, but what exactly they're doing in Shulva is anyone's guess. But even after the kingdom was consumed by dragon's poison, one particular character, Elana, the Squalid Queen, remained. She's one of Manu's fragment, embodying his rage, and she latched onto the Sunken King, feeding off Thin's power. Even long after Shulva's downfall, she continued building up her strength, waiting for the right moment to avenge her creator. In the end, we defeat both Elana and Thin, and claim our prize, the crown of the Sunken King. After that, we head to the mining complex of the Old Iron King, which I mentioned earlier. Here, we encounter Nadalia, the fragment of Manus that represents loneliness. What exactly Nadalia wanted is unclear, and by the time she showed up, the Old Iron King was already dead. She latched onto his legacy and remained in these ruins as a wandering spirit, haunting the area and whispering her sorrow. At the very bottom of the mines, we'll find her corpse, holding the crown of the Old Iron King. But before we get to that, we had to get through her champion, Hume Knight. Easily one of the most badass bosses in the entire game, and for many, the single most difficult fight in all of Dark Souls 2. As we have come to expect from Software's DLC, the boss fights here absolutely shine, especially compared to some of the half-baked ones in the base game. Hume Knight, lore-wise, used to be a high-ranking warrior in Vendrick's court. Together with Velstadt, they were seen as the king's left and right hand. But somewhere along the way, they had a falling out, and Hume Knight was branded a traitor. He left Drangleic and ended up joining the All Iron King. There, he met Nadalia, fell in love with her, and swore to protect her body for eternity. Now, he stands as her final line of defense. And goddamn, Hume Knight lives up to the hype. I completely understand everyone who calls him the hardest boss in the game. He's incredibly tough and super fun to fight. And if you don't deal with Nadalia's spirit fragments around the boss arena ahead of time, he'll even heal himself during the fight, using their power. His main difficulty lies in the brutal second phase, when he pulls out his flaming sword and starts smashing you with double the intensity. But just like with Artorias in Dark Souls 1, there is a secret. I'm not fully sure, but supposedly, if you keep chugging Estus near him during the first phase, it messes with his transition to phase 2, and possibly resetting it and making the fight easier. I tried this a few times and only managed to pull it off once, but hey, it kinda works. After claiming another crown, if you're in the mood to keep exploring, you will eventually stumble upon another smelter demon, but this time the bastard is blue. And not far from there, you will find the armor of Sir Alone. Yes, that's Sir Alone, the guy who trained the entire Iron King's army in the art of war. And here is a twist. At some point, Sir Alone just vanished. Everyone assumed he abandoned his king and disappeared. But the truth is that we, the Chosen Undead, teleported into the past and defeated him in battle. That's how his tale ended. Now, Sir Alone is a seriously cool boss, easily one of the most graceful and stylish in the entire game. The fight is a proper duel, clean, honorable showdown with no bullshit mechanics. And finally we come to the last DLC, Crown of the Ivory King. Here we meet Alsana, the Silent Oracle, the fragment of Manos that represents fear. Interestingly, she is the only one of the four who never tried to manipulate or corrupt anyone. Instead, she genuinely loved her husband, the Ivory King, and tried to support the kingdom after he vanished. And the way he vanished? Pretty damn intense. Turns out, beneath the castle a rift into chaos itself opened. The Ivory King willingly sacrificed himself to descend into the chaos and hold it back. In response, Alsana unleashed an eternal blizzard across the kingdom in a desperate attempt to slow the endless spread of chaos. Now, the optional bosses in this DLC are not particularly cool, but the final fight against the Ivory King? Yeah, that shit hits different. Before his descent into chaos, the Ivory King took with him a legion of loyal knights, all of whom burned with him, and eventually lost their minds. But 4 of his knights remained in the castle, awaiting the return of their lord. Throughout the DLC, you can track down and recruit these knights, and when the time comes, march together into the flames of chaos as a squad, clashing with waves of enemies in one of the most epic, large-scale fights in the entire series. This context, the scale, the storytelling, the build-up, it all turns the final battle into one of the most memorable moments in all of Dark Souls 2. Honestly, I would call this entire DLC the best in the game. And it's not just my personal weakness for snowy, winter-themed zones, though that's part of it. It's the lore, the themes, and the emotional stakes that elevate it far above the rest. But let's get back to the crowns. After completing all 3 DLCs, we still need to retrieve Vendrick's Soul crown, which is hidden behind a secret door in the Shrine of Amana. Once we gathered all 4, we can return to him, and then Vendrick performs a sort of enchantment, a final gift. From now on, if you wear any one of the 4 crowns, you will no longer lose your humanity upon death. Alright, now it's time for the grand finale. Before heading into the endgame, we can also choose to find Vendrick himself. Just keep in mind, he's got insanely high resistance to physical damage, and the only way to counter it is by collecting giant souls scattered throughout the kingdom. The more you have, the more his defenses crumble. With all the artifacts in hand, the kingdom shattered behind us, and even Vendrick defeated, we finally approach the kiln on the first flame, the final destination. And what awaits us there? A full-blown boss rush festival. First, we faced off against the Throne Watcher and Throne Defender, 2 guards standing between us and the truce. Once they're down, we're met by Nashandra herself, who smugly explains how she's played everyone like a damn fiddle. We open the way for her, clear out all the obstacles, and now nothing can stop her. Well, except us, of course. So we hand her a royal ass-kicking and knock her out of the picture. And then Aldia shows up. No real explanation for why the guy decides to crash the party, but hey, he's clearly not done stirring the pot. So we throw down one more time and beat his philosophical, tree-shaped ass into submission. And then we are finally given a choice. Do we sit on the throne and rekindle the flame, keeping the cycle alive? Or do we walk away, guided by Aldia's final words, assuming he survived our battle? He speaks of a path beyond light, where even darkness cannot reach. a path where the flame no longer rules, and the cycle can be broken. And he tells us we are strong enough to find it, to break the chains, to end the curse, to shatter the cycle once and for all. So here I am, sitting and trying to gather my thoughts on Dark Souls 2 after 45 hours of gameplay. And honestly, I'm conflicted as hell. Let me say this right away. Everything I'm about to share is purely my personal opinion. Some of you will agree, some will not, and that's totally fine. Under my last video, where I mentioned I wasn't exactly in love with Elden Ring, some people rush in to convince me how wrong I was. So yeah, I would love to hear your takes and your opinions about the game in the comments. Just one thing, let's keep it cool. No fanboying, no flinging shit at each other, alright? Now, Dark Souls 2 has some huge flaws, so big you really have to be a hardcore sequel apologist to pretend they don't exist. But at the same time, the game also has a lot of strengths, and for me, those strengths overweigh the flaws. But let's go in order. We'll start, naturally, with the negatives. First up, adaptability. Honestly, I didn't even plan to talk about it, because I personally had zero issues with it throughout the entire game. Every time I flopped a dodge, I just chalk it up to my usual clumsiness and stupidity. If it weren't for the internet, I wouldn't even have known that the adaptability controls your iframes on rolls. But whatever, that topic's already been beaten to death across the community, so I won't harp on it more. What I do want to talk about though is Estus. We had a solid, well understood system. You get a flask, you increase how many charges you've got, and you can boost the amount it heals. But only in Dark Souls 2. On top of all that, you also have to level up the damn speed you drink it. Why? Who thought that was a good idea? What purpose does it serve? Especially when you're carrying around a practically infinite supply of life gems that can keep your health topped off constantly. And on top of that, you can move while using them, unlike Estus, where you freeze in place to chug it. Like, come on. Another common complaint about Dark Souls 2 is the sheer number of enemies in certain locations, especially on the way to mandatory bosses. And look, I partially agree. I will admit, there are a few spots where From Software could have chilled out a bit with the bomb density. But overall, I don't really think this is a real issue. Why? Because every Soulsborne game does the same thing. We have always had gauntlets to bosses. We've run through poison swamps, gotten crushed by flying boulders, suffered through the fucking top of the giants in total darkness, and sprinted past mobs like maniacs. And let's not even talk about Bloodborne, where the path to the very first boss is filled like a goddamn zoo of drooling psychos camping around the bonfire. To me, the actual problem is that people still try to dash through everything like they play in Dark Souls 1, triggering all aggro in a 10-mile radius and hoping they can just smash through the fog gate unscathed. But surprise surprise, in Dark Souls 2 you don't get iframes while entering boss fog, which means you'll get shanked in the back by an entire angry mob while fumbling to get inside. That's the issue in my opinion, not the enemy count. If you slow down, take your time, and pull enemies one at a time, the run up to the boss is usually manageable. And also, kill enemies 12 times and they disappear permanently. That's right, no other Souls game gives you this grace. You either get good or run the same gauntlet 100 times. So yeah, you could argue Dark Souls 2 is actually more casual friendly in this regard. Last thing I will say on this, the game lacks what I would call elite enemies. You know, those mini-boss tier mobs scattered through other Souls titles. So even with enemy spam, most of them are not that dangerous on their own. But if you're the impatient type who needs to sprint through levels like a maniac, well, yeah, Dark Souls 2 probably isn't for you. You will hate it. Now, something I do fully agree with is that most of the bosses in Dark Souls 2 are just Don't get me wrong, some of them look cool and have solid movesets. But there is no real substance behind most of them. The lore is paper thin, and the fights themselves, well, often forgettable and over in 1 or 2 attempts. And finally, the last major gripe I have, and it's bugged the hell out of me for the entire game, is the target lock behavior. Specifically, if the enemy dodges or jumps away, even with target lock on, your character swings into the void like a moron, instead of adjusting toward the target. Maybe this sounds nitpicky or dumb, but trust me, it pisses me off consistently. Even at the very end, I was still getting screwed by this exact mechanic. So yeah, that's the final straw in the annoying quirks category. And on that note, I really want to move on to the positives of the game, and I would like to start with my overall impression. Honestly, I'm thrilled. Maybe not quite as thrilled as I was after my first playthrough of the original Dark Souls or Bloodborne, but still, I genuinely fell in love with this game. I fully admit it has flaws. No reasonable person would seriously try to defend all of them. But despite the flaws, the game has a ton of strengths, and those strengths absolutely outweigh the issues for me. It's one of those games where if you just list all the downsides, you might think it's a disaster, but in reality, it's not that simple. In fact, while playing Dark Souls 2, I found myself mentally comparing it to another of my favorite games of all time, Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl. That game is very dear to me, and I would love to make a video about the entire trilogy someday. If you would like to see that, please let me know in the comments. But here is the thing, Stalker is known for its insane amount of fun main mods. Some of them are amazing, adding whole new stories, systems and mechanics. And others, well, absolute garbage like mods that crank all the damage up to 1000% or spawn waves of enemies just for the lulz. And that's exactly what Dark Souls 2 feels like sometimes. A very high effort fun main mod of the original Dark Souls. Like a hardcore fan took the Miyazaki's blueprint and made their own take on it. It kinda looks the same, kinda plays the same, but somehow feels completely different. It lacks the same polish, that deep game design magic the original Dark Souls had. Some things are overcooked, some things fell off, some are weirdly better, but the end result is that quirky, charming remix of something you already loved. It's like replaying your childhood favorite game, but with just enough changes to make everything feel fresh again. Sometimes I will just sit in my jeweler, doing absolutely nothing, listening to its enchanting soundtrack, and in those moments I realize, no matter how much I might criticize some of its mechanics, for the atmosphere, for the sense of discovery it gave me, I will forgive Dark Souls 2 almost anything. Its importance to the series also can be overstated. Even Miyazaki himself has said he loves the game and is proud of it. And when you look at how many new mechanics Dark Souls 2 introduced, stuff that didn't appear again until Elden Ring, it's hard not to admire it. We're talking torches, Pharaoh's lockstones, oh hello sword-shaped keys from Elden Ring, drop chests, again shout out to Elden Ring, and the Branch of Yore. All of that was unique to Dark Souls 2, and it's kind of a shame that later games didn't build on them. So yeah, this game is not perfect, even far from it, but it's a flawed masterpiece in its own right. One of the things that can be seen as both a positive and a negative is the length of the game. From my perspective, Dark Souls 2 feels like the longest From Software game, well, aside from Elden Ring, of course. At some point I even thought it was dragging on a bit too much, but then I dove into the DLCs and I didn't want to leave the game at all. I have also heard tons of praise about the game's PvP, some even say it's the best in the entire trilogy, but I can't really comment on that. PvP was never really my thing and I didn't explore that side of the game. I could go on and on about how much I love Dark Souls 2, but I think it's time to wrap it up. Maybe I won't go as far as saying it's better than Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 3, like some people do, but I will still admit, it's a great game. A game that, in my opinion, absolutely deserves objective criticism, but doesn't deserve the sheer amount of hate that's been thrown at it over the years. It's a game I know I will come back to again and again. There is still so much I have left unexplored. Bosses I skipped, storylines I didn't finish, secrets I missed. And honestly, I might even agree with the people who say that Dark Souls 2 is the perfect entry point for newcomers to the Souls series, even if I still believe Bloodborne would do that job a little better. Huge thanks if you made it this far into the video. I really do pour a ton of time and energy into writing this script and putting everything together, so if you drop a like, I will be insanely grateful. Every like, comment or subscription helps me to get noticed by more people, so once again, huge thanks for your support. And if you enjoy the kind of content I make, maybe consider clicking that subscribe button. It only takes a second, but for me it's a massive source of motivation to keep making videos like this in the future. No matter when you stumble upon this video, know this, I'm already working on the next one, and if this somehow ends up being the last time you ever hear my voice, well, thank you for spending your time with me. Once again, thank you for watching. See you soon.